everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the future Tier 6 French jet aircraft that I personally would like to see added to the game at some point. Now before we start, I do just want to mention a few things just to clear up any misconceptions people may have about this video. First off, this video will not include every single French aircraft that could be added into Tier 6. These are only the vehicles I personally would like to see. So vehicles such as the Entard, despite being incredibly likely to be added, will not be in this video. Now another thing is that I will not be including jet aircraft already in the game, like for example the F-100. Now the French Air Force did use the F-100, but it's already in the game, so it seems very likely they will be getting it, so I didn't really see the point of covering it. And I also will not be including aircraft that are way too modern, for example like the Dassault Rafale. That is definitely not coming to the game anytime soon. Please do note that there are a few aircraft in this video that would fall into the experimental aircraft category, and with some of them there is not a set or even listed anywhere weapons payload for the aircraft. So what I've had to do with them is I've gone to a similar aircraft from a similar time period from the French Air Force, and I've borrowed the weapon statistics from that aircraft. So with a few of the experimental aircraft, the stats are probably going to be slightly off to what the real thing would have carried, but it's just something to sort of give a comparison of how it likely would have performed with weapons payloads. Well, now that that has all been said, the final thing to mention is that if you do notice I've made any type of obvious mistake, do please let me know in the comments so that I can make an amendments comment that I can pin, just to make sure that everyone knows that I know the mistakes are there. Okay, so now that we're going to get into our first aircraft, do remember these are not in any particular order, they're just randomly jumbled up in the order that I researched them, so keep that in mind as we get into our first aircraft, the Mirage 3. Now when you think of supersonic French aircraft being added into the game, this is likely what comes to mind. Now the variant I have mostly chosen to focus on is the E variant. This variant was designed to be more of a strike fighter, being able to utilise both air-to-air type weaponry payloads as well as air-to-ground weaponry payloads, which we will talk about in a short bit. But first off, let's get to the two statistics that I am mostly judging most of these aircraft off of, that being the top speed of the airplane and the rate of climb. So starting off with the top speed of the aircraft, this can reach a maximum speed of 2,350 kilometers per hour. In miles per hour, that is 1,460 miles per hour. So again, very fast aeroplane, much faster than stuff like the F-100 and the MiG-19, definitely a lot faster than the Gloster Javelin, so it's way quicker than all other Tier 6s, which does mean it'll likely not be in the game for a fair while. I expect that the French will start off with a jet that we'll be looking at a bit later on in this video. Rate of climb is only 83 meters per second, which is good, but compared to stuff like the MiG-19 in-game, it is a bit lower, so you have a much higher top speed, but less climb rate, so it's sort of a balance there, to be honest. Like if this was to be added now, you would be way faster than the MiG-19, but it is likely the MiG-19 would have an altitude advantage. Although as I said, this aircraft has been able to utilise strike payloads as well as air-to-air payloads. First off, we'll get into the guns. Two 30mm DEFA 5.52 cannons, 125 rounds per gun. Not too bad, I would say, although as we know from other aircraft that have similar French autocannons like this, for example, the Vautour, the sort of attack variant, these rounds bleed off incredibly fast. So you do want to be rather careful with them. Those rounds will bleed off incredibly quickly when you're firing them, so a bit of trigger discipline should really help with that if this aircraft's added when you're using these guns. First off, it can carry, in terms of ground strike capability, rockets, unguided rockets. You can first off carry two Matra rocket packs. These each have 19 68mm SNEB rockets. You can also carry a drop tank, although at the moment, obviously, drop tank mechanics are not added into the game, so that's not really going to be something we're going to look into. In terms of missiles, two AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles, a missile that we have seen widely used on the American F-100, and technically on the MiG-19, as the missile that uses is a reverse-engineered Sidewinder. So, in terms of the missiles being overpowered, that's not really going to be the case. So definitely an aeroplane I am excited to see at some point in the future, although the likelihood of it being added any time in the near future is fairly unlikely due to the fact that it would basically wipe the floor with everything it faces, although nonetheless something I'm excited to see in the future. Next up, we have a fairly interesting aircraft. It is in fact yet another Mirage 3 variant. This is the Mirage 3V. Now, this aircraft is effectively a vertical takeoff and landing modification of the Mirage 3, and what they did was they literally just stretched the fuselage and chucked in a load of Rolls-Royce lift engines facing directly downwards, where when it wanted to hover, air intakes would open up on top of the fuselage, allowing the air to flow through the engines, and it would literally just direct a load of thrust directly downwards below the center of mass, and it would allow the aircraft to hover. And this is a rather interesting aircraft. It is a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that can reach Mach 2.04. That's the maximum speed it reached in testing. The cruising speed is more around Mach 1.5, but nonetheless, this thing can fly at Mach 2.04, at least that's the max that it hit in testing. And this was built many years ago, about 50 years ago, basically, more than 50 years ago, in fact. And that really does put aircraft today, like the F-35, sort of to shame, considering how much faster this thing is. Nonetheless, though, it was only a test aircraft, although it was developed for a fighter contract, although it never won the contract, but nonetheless, it was developed for a fighter contract, so I technically count it as a fighter aircraft. So what I've done is I've effectively taken the weapons statistics from the Mirage 3E, and I've only taken the stats for the fighter aspects of that design. I've not added any strike capability to this aircraft, as I was thinking, you know, it's basically an interceptor, it's high speed, and there's nothing stating it was designed for strike as well. So effectively what this would likely have is 2 Sidewinders and 2 30mm DEFA cannons. Fairly basic payload there, but nonetheless not too bad, and the vertical takeoff and landing will really help in certain situations. For example, one possible scenario, you're using the aircraft in Tank RB, possibly to defend your friendly team from enemy aircraft or helicopters, and instead of having to go off and land at the airfield, you could just land at the helicopter spawn, something of which does actually work with aircraft right now. You can land, taxi to the helicopter spawn, and you get an air spawn from that. So that could be an option, and I'm sure if Gaijin was to add vertical takeoff and landing, something of which I would very much like to be added, I'm sure they would add it in a way that would make them incredibly useful in specific ways. Anyway, though, that was all I was really able to get on this aircraft, so fairly basic stats overall, just over Mach 2 maximum speed, vertical takeoff and landing, and fairly basic fighter weaponry. So next up we have another one of the more experimental aircraft, this being the Mirage F2. Now this aircraft was designed for the exact same contract as the Mirage F1, effectively to have a low altitude intruder strike type aircraft that would have fairly low approach speeds, because at the time the French were obviously using stuff like the early Mirage 3s as strike aircraft. You have a delta wing, landing at high speeds is something you're going to have to do. So landing at lower speeds is definitely going to be quite good for a strike aircraft, and so the F1 and the F2 were designed. Now we're going to talk about the F2. So this basically was a twin-seat aircraft. It effectively is an F1, just with a slightly more beefy fuselage, and in terms of stats, it's not half bad. At high altitude, you can reach a speed of Mach 2.2, that is 2,333 kilometers per hour, or 1,450 miles per hour. In terms of weaponry payload, I've made the assumption that it would have the same weapon payload as the Mirage F1, this being 2 30mm DEFA 553 cannons with 150 rounds per gun. Again, French autocannons, those rounds will drain fast, but nonetheless a bit more rounds than the Mirage 3 had, so not really going to complain about that. It also had 1 centerline hardpoint, 4 underwing hardpoints, and the Mirage F1 did have some wingtip pylons, although I'm not so sure if that would be the case on this aircraft. In terms of maximum load, roughly around 4,000 kilograms or 8,800 pounds of provisions. This is a combination of Matra rocket pods with 18 SNEB 68mm rockets each, or a variety of unguided iron bombs. It could also carry reconnaissance pods or drop tanks, but it's likely that they won't be in the game. And in terms of missiles, it could only carry 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders or Matra M550 Magics, which are on the F1 mounted on the wingtip pylons. If this doesn't have them, I presume they would be mounted either under the fuselage or on one of the wing pylons. Although to briefly sum the aircraft up, you're going to be getting an aircraft with both decent striking capability thanks to the unguided bombs as well as the rocket pods, and also a decent air-to-air fighter capability thanks to the air-to-air missiles and the pretty decent autocannons that you have installed on the aircraft. Overall, I think it's an aircraft that of course we will have to wait a bit for thanks to the Mach 2.2 top speed, but nonetheless, if it does come to the game, it is a nice looking aircraft and definitely something I would be interested in testing out. So next up we have the aircraft we actually just used the weapon stats for, this being the Mirage F1. So this aircraft is basically very similar to the Mirage F2 in general statistics and capability. First off, the maximum speed is again Mach 2.2, this being 2,338 kilometers per hour or 1,453 miles per hour at an altitude of 36,000 feet, which is actually well within the map limits in the game at the moment, so reaching that speed when this is added is likely going to be very possible. The rate of climb of this aircraft is an astounding 243 meters per second, far better than anything we have in the game right now, so definitely this will not be added at least for quite a few updates, or until such a time when other nations have aircraft that could fairly easily compete. In terms of weaponry, it is again the same stuff I mentioned for the F2, this being the two 30mm DEFA 553 cannons with 150 rounds per gun, the hardpoints with the Matra rocket pods, of which this can carry 8 of them with the 18 SNEB 68mm rockets, as well as various unguided bombs, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders, or Matra M550 Magics on the wingtip pylons. So fairly basic, again, an aircraft that has a decent striking capability, as well as a decent air-to-air dogfighting or just general anti-aircraft capability. So generally a good all-round aircraft there, to sum it up. Something again that I would definitely be very interested to see added to the game, and see how it performs when facing other aircraft of similar performance from other nations. So you guys remember that Mirage F2 we spoke about a few minutes ago? Well, this is actually that, only with a few nice little modifications that give it better performance in general all areas. This is the Mirage G. More specifically, I'll be talking about the variant called the G8. This is effectively the Mirage F2 fuselage, fitted with 2 more powerful engines and with a swing wing design similar to aircraft such as the Panavia Tornado, the F-14 Tomcat and the F-111 Aardvark. And the looks of this aircraft definitely do mirror the F-111 in my opinion, as well as the Tornado, so definitely a very interesting contrast there. Now in terms of the max speed, at ground level, this can hit Mach 1.3 thanks to the swing wing design, as well as also up to Mach 2.5 at 12,000 meters of altitude. So, you know, that's a lot of speed, very powerful fast aircraft there. I can definitely see this being added as, at least possibly being added, when the Americans eventually get stuff like the F-14 and the F-111 as a possible counter to that for the times when the French do face the Americans. Definitely a very interesting possibility, I would say, to be added at some point. In terms of weaponry, it is actually very similar to the F1. You can carry the 230mm DEFA cannons, the 553s, 150 rounds per gun yet again. Hardpoints, you have the centerline pylon, although on the wings, apparently you actually have 6 pylons and no wingtip pylons. Of course, pylons on the wingtips wouldn't be such a good idea when the wing is swinging, because after the wing is swung, it's going to be facing a completely different direction, so that's not going to be so good. So instead, you apparently have 6 underwing pylons. This overall can carry 7 Matra rocket pods with 18 SNEB 68mm rockets, supposedly 1 on the underside pylon, although personally, I wouldn't put an unguided rocket pod underneath your fuselage, just in case the rockets decide they want to change direction a little bit and happen to hit the front of your aircraft. Nonetheless though, apparently it can carry 7 of these pods, as well as various unguided iron bombs, various reconnaissance pods or drop tanks, although of course, as I said before, they are likely not to be in the game, at least for the time being. So from what I could find about this aircraft's guided missile capability, you could either have 6 AIM-9 Sidewinders, 1 on each of the wing pylons, or you could have 6 R550 Magics, 1 on each of the wing pylons. So that is 2 different types of guided missile you can have there, and you can either have 6 Sidewinders or 6 Magics. So very interesting there. The Sidewinder, of course, is a missile we know in-game, and we know how that performs, and I think having 6 of them on an aircraft, it would of course increase your chances of getting a kill, because you have more of them to use, but it wouldn't make it any more overpowered. The Sidewinder itself is a missile where all you really need to do is make a fairly rapid adjustment to your aircraft's direction, and it'll either lose the heat signature or it just won't be able to maintain the right maneuverability to actually be able to outmaneuver you and hit you. So Sidewinder isn't overly overpowered in my opinion, but nonetheless, the Mirage G, an aircraft that I think would be a brilliant contrast to stuff like the F-14, the F-111, and possibly even the Panavia Tornado if that is ever added to nations like Britain, Germany, or Italy. But nonetheless, the Mirage G is definitely an interesting topic to discuss, and definitely an aircraft I again would be very happy to see in game and test at some point in the future. So now to finish off, I'm going to be taking a look at an aircraft which I feel should be the first French Tier 6 jet aircraft, this being the Super Mystère B2. Now this aircraft actually has slightly less performance than stuff like the F-100, far less in terms of climb rate than the MiG-19, so I feel this would be a competitive yet not too overpowered aircraft to add as an initial supersonic aircraft for the French. So in terms of speed, this can hit Mach 1.12, that's 1,195 kilometers per hour, or 743 miles per hour, at an altitude of 11,000 meters or 36,000 feet. So higher altitude, obviously, actually going supersonic is at a lower speed due to different temperature levels and different air density and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, the speed is actually lower than supersonic is at ground level, but nonetheless, at altitude, it is supersonic. Rate of climb of 89 meters per second, or 18,000 feet per minute, is far less than the MiG-19, so no way in that aspect will it be overpowered. Of course, an important thing to look at when talking about any aircraft is the weaponry options, and this aircraft does not disappoint. First off, you have two 30mm DEFA 552 cannons. These have 150 rounds per gun, but as I've said before in the video, these are French autocannons. These rounds will bleed off very fast, so do make sure to have a bit of trigger discipline when using any guns like this already in the game, or possibly on aircraft that come to the game in the future. In terms of rockets, you can carry two Matra rocket pods with 18 SNEB 68mm rockets each. Again, that will be useful for your ground strike capability. In terms of missiles, rather interesting here. I believe the missiles this can use are Israeli missiles, first off, two Rafale Shafir missiles. They sound pretty Israeli to me. I know this was used by the Israelis, so it's likely that. And you can also use two AS-30L missiles. Now, I'm not quite sure where they are, though I'll put a picture of them up on the screen so you guys can get an idea of what it is. And finally, you can also carry up to 2,680 kilograms or 5,000 pounds of bombs on 4 external hardpoints. This is literally just a variety of unguided bombs, and again, possibly reconnaissance pods or drop tanks, although as I've said before, they're likely to not be in the game for a while, or possibly even ever. Anyway though, that was the Mystère B2, an aircraft which I think would perfectly fit the role of being one of the first French Tier 6 aircraft. Of course, the Entard could also be a very nice early Tier 6, but nonetheless, I think that is a topic for another video, and in this video, I did want to focus mainly on supersonic aircraft. The Entard isn't quite supersonic from what I can tell, it's more of a just subsonic aircraft. But nonetheless, that would be a nice aircraft to see, although it's not really an aircraft I am personally interested in. Anyway though, I am going to end the video there. So they were the aircraft that I personally would like to see. Of course, you may have other ideas of the type of French jets you would like to see in the game, so do feel free to comment below and let me know what aircraft you personally would like to see. Anyway though, thank you very much for watching the video. If you did enjoy, please consider smashing the like button, maybe even subscribe to the channel if you have not already. In the description there are links to my Twitter profile, my Discord server, my Patreon page, and my live.warthunder profile, so do go take a look at them. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.